Hi, everyone. My name is Bill Norton, and I'm here to give a talk at the Apricot Conference, a talk called An Application Perspective of the Asia-Pacific Peering Ecosystem. I got to say first, I really wish I could be there in person with you guys because so many years I've been to Apricots, Nanogs, Right Meetings, all those. And really the value that I get is from the interactions, the hallway conversation, the things that we say in our talks that end up being good fodder for conversations over coffees, because I think there's a lot of alignment and a lot of interest in these various things, and all of us have different perspectives and different experiences. So bringing them together in a conference is something I dearly miss, and I'm glad that COVID is mostly kind of winding down now, and I look forward to seeing you guys at the next Apricot conference in person. But as many of you may know who know me, I've been in peering for about 10, 12 years as one of the co-founders of Equinix. I traveled around the world and spent all my time at operations forums, much like Apricot and Ripe and such, because that's where I gathered all my information for writing white papers on how peering works, what the process is, what the obstacles are, and so forth. In the last few years, since retiring from Equinix, I converted all the white papers into a book called the Internet Peering Playbook, and that's been out for few years now. That led to a lot of consulting work. So if you're curious what I've been doing for the last bunch of years, I did a lot of work across Africa. My book sold 1,500 copies as part of a Train the Trainers initiative to try and get peering more widely deployed across Africa. I did a lot of work with commercial companies as well, e-commerce companies, gaming companies, and so forth. But these last couple of years, I've migrated into this really interesting project that I'm very excited to tell you about. And as part of this talk, I'm trying to tie together the blockchain stuff that I'm doing now with Syntropy, along with the peering stuff that you guys and I have worked on for a long time. So with nothing more to say about that, let's get right into this. The Asia Pacific peering ecosystem is kind of an interesting one from my perspective. I've studied the internet peering ecosystems around the world, and what's interesting about Asia is that it's more diverse, I feel, than in other parts of the world. In the U.S., you have 7 interconnection regions. You have some tier one ISPs. It's pretty much homogenous. It's pretty stable. In Asia, though, you have a lot more different types of ISPs operating different, what they call contiguous cultural and language regions. These are places where the best way I can put it is Japanese eyeballs like Japanese content. So you tend to see the eyeballs and the content being in that same place. Well, in Asia, you've got a whole bunch of different contiguous cultural language regions. And these have all grown organically. That is, ISPs would expand into a region only when there was a business case to do so. So what you have is kind of a mishmash of different types of companies that are operating the infrastructure that all grew organically, yet they all have to provide global access to the public internet. So there's a cooperation and competition that leads to a connected internet. You can reach all the destinations, but what we found in our research is you're not always really getting the best paths. And one example that always comes up when talking about Asia is the Asia Boomerang. And here is a case where if you have, say, 3 countries in Asia, each having 1 or 2 incumbent dominating ISPs, they want connectivity to the global internet, but they don't want to cede any competitive space for global competitors to come into their country and compete against them. So what they tend to do is not peer their traffic within their own country, but peer their traffic in another country far away. That way they get the connectivity from the foreign potential competitor, but any attempt to try and sell internet access within their own country will require the traffic to go across the ocean and back a couple of times. So the performance, if a foreign company was to come in and compete, would be really quite bad. So that way they get the connectivity without having the potential competitive threat. John Milburn from Daycom years and years ago, he told me at one of these conferences that the desire to protect one's home market dwarfs any benefit that internet peering might provide. And as a result, you have some amount of traffic that will go across a more circuitous path. And this is just one of the reasons why you see some interesting and bizarre kinds of traffic patterns. So one of the things that we found is that an overlay can really help here. An overlay where you have end systems that are constantly measuring performance to one another can identify that it's actually faster to relay traffic through an intermediary. And this is basically what DARP does, and that's what I'll introduce next. DARP is the Distributed Autonomous Routing Protocol. It's something that we invented based on the observation that if you have a collection of nodes, such as shown on your screen, and these nodes continuously measure one-way latency measurements to each other, you don't need to have the clocks to be synchronized to answer the following question. Is it better for me to send a packet directly to the destination, or is it better, faster, to go through an intermediary first and ricochet that traffic off that intermediary to get to that destination? And again, if we look back here, that's precisely what we want to have happen. We want to have the traffic not go all the way to the US, but bounce off of a regional location and then get back to the destination. So that's what DARP does. Now you might ask the question, well, you would assume you'd have to have all these clocks and all these nodes synchronized in order to get accurate measurements. But remember what we're trying to do here with DARP. We're not looking for absolute latency measurements. We're looking to answer this one question. Is it better to send this packet directly to the destination, or is it better to send that packet through an intermediary? Now, if any of these nodes have a clock that's off, either plus or minus, that's okay, because when the packet is sent to a node that, say, is a little bit ahead, 2 seconds ahead, that one section will appear to be a couple seconds longer. But when you say, well, what if I ricochet a packet off of that node to another destination? Well, that final destination might be 2 seconds closer as it would appear, maybe even a negative number. But when you add those two numbers together, you find that whatever skew that one node has is exactly offset. So 2 seconds ahead on the way there, 2 seconds behind on the way back, and you compare that against the direct measurement where the clocks are, however they are, you will find that you can actually determine the answer to that question. Is it better to go direct, or is it better to go through an intermediary? And you don't need to have the clock synchronized. Doing this analysis and going through the proof and stuff like that, we found some really interesting anomalies in the underlying internet, and we'll get to that in a second. But first, to tie together this DARP idea. So these packets that are sent between these nodes actually contains the collection of measurements made to that node, so that all nodes in the system are getting packets in as they're sending their packets out, and those packets in contain the measurements that were made to each of these nodes. So what's really cool about that is when all these nodes have all these state packets combined, you get this beautiful matrix here on the left-hand side, and this matrix is exactly the same across all of the nodes in this group. So this is the really cool part, is that every node is endowed with a full mesh of one-way latency measurements between every other node. This enables the end system to make that determination on routing. Is it better to go direct, or is it better to go through an intermediary? And it does so using this global state information. It's really kind of cool. Now, just to demonstrate with an example, so if this was a matrix based upon one pulse, and we're pulsing once a second here. If this is a one particular matrix in this scenario, if we take a look at nodes C to D, C going to D directly is 100 milliseconds. It's basically that square there measured C to D in this matrix. But if you go CAD, C to A is 50, A to D is 51, you find out, well, no, it doesn't make sense. It's actually a little slower to go through that intermediary. But you notice CBD, that path is 87 milliseconds. So this is just kind of an easy example to give you a sense of how this can be done, the routing at the edge, and how it's automatic. It's a mathematical thing. Tying all this together into a flow, from the left you have the DARP nodes that feed information. These are high value information that gets extended into these OWL matrices. Again, a very powerful, dense amount of information. This gets in turn deployed to applications such as the one that I'm using to measure the performance across Asia and to identify, are there optimizations that can be made in Asia ricocheting off of intermediary nodes. The question I got asked at a nanog when I was showing some of these graphs I'm about to show you was, well, it's interesting that you're finding these optimizations. What are the sources of these optimizations? How long do these optimizations last? And how much better are they? And that's essentially what I'd like to start getting into now. What is the definition of a better path? Well, quite simply, a better path is where between two endpoints, A and C, A to B and B to C is a better performing, lower latency path, lower jitter, what have you, as compared to the end destination. And a couple of heuristics I'll share with you from doing this research and doing just countless amounts of measurement here is we came up with a metric called better path seconds. And this is defined as the number of seconds where a particular intermediary node is providing a better measured network path between two endpoints. This is interesting because in the system that we're working on building, it is those relay nodes that will earn cryptocurrency for sharing their connectivity and relaying packets for others. So it's really an important thing to know, well, where should one put these relays to get the most amount of relayed packets to earn the most money? And the metric I'm using here is better path seconds, meaning how often is this particular region or location showing up as the best path. So we're measuring these one-way latencies with the DARP protocol, as I just explained. It's also important to point out that that's not just the only metric. We have a combination of other metrics that go along with this. But this latency is easiest to understand and easiest to demonstrate. So I deployed a whole bunch of agents around the world, and then I cut them back down to focus a little bit more on the Asia Pacific locations. You can see from Chennai, I actually had one in Mumbai, Taipei, Tokyo, and I have the US West one over there. I think I had a couple of US West ones for a while, because I wanted to be able to catch those relays across the ocean. Those relays do end up being about 100 milliseconds in additional latency. So that is enough to cut out and have it be worthwhile doing so. I'm also using some very good carriers. I mentioned ZenLayer and Equinix Metal because I've had some really good luck using those bare metal servers and spinning up the software to do the measurements. And I also connected to AWS and Azure. Again, what I'm really looking for is where does it make sense to put these relays nodes and how much traffic might they be able to pass? That's the area of my study. And then, of course, the other thing is what ISPs or hosting providers would be hosting what could be these backbone relay nodes for our community. And my theory is, from my peering background, is maybe these guys who are peering a lot of their traffic away more directly will give us more greater heterogeneity on the underlying internet and therefore more better paths to choose from. So that's what I'm kind of gunning for here. The measurement apparatus is, I took the DARP protocol and I wrote most of it again in Rust. Again, if we were here in person, I would love to have a hallway conversation with any of you folks who are coding Rust, because it's really kind of a neat language for concurrency, and it's a very low-level language. It's very powerful. But we're not here in person, so we can't have that conversation, I suppose. Okay, so let's talk about what we found. First off, a lot of you in the network engineering space know that you can do pings, and very often you'll see spikes here and there. those spikes will never be explained. They don't generally cause a problem. So you generally dismiss those. Well, the same kind of thing happens here. As I'm looking at the matrix of measurements, I see every so often these anomalies. And what I've done is come up with a heuristic that seemed to calm down the noise quite a bit, to only show those individual points where we can take advantage of the better connectivity. I wouldn't change a path just because it was 10 milliseconds better, but if it's 10 milliseconds better for a longer period of time, well, maybe. Then you want to take a look at, well, how stable is the path? So the two heuristics that I've kind of settled on is I don't highlight a path as being a better path unless it's at least 10 milliseconds better one way, and that optimization lasts for at least 10 seconds. I wouldn't bother switching traffic to go through an intermediary for 2 seconds or 3 seconds. It's got to be a better path that lasts longer. The other thing that was interesting was this actually describes what is, but what you really want to know before you switch your packets over to going along a different path through an intermediary is how long has that better path been there, and has it always been that much better? And what I found is that the median of medians is actually a good indicator of what the history has been like. So if you have 145 milliseconds of direct path, and there's another path that's available to you that looks like it's a steady 100 milliseconds, and you can go back and look, wow, that's been like that for the last 2 hours. That's a pretty good one to jump over to. So these are the sorts of heuristics that I've started applying to the measurement tools. The other thing that's interesting is that heterogeneity of the underlying internet has a huge impact. And let me give you a specific example. I spun up about 20 or so AWS regions and ran DARP on all of them. They were doing the pulsing and the measurements. And what I found is that within AWS itself, there were 8 long-term sustained optimizations where it's actually better for you to send your traffic through an intermediary AWS node to get to a destination AWS node than it is to go direct using the AWS network. So the 8 long-term sustained optimizations just on AWS. I did the exact same thing on Azure, and I noticed only a few of these intermittent, not really lasting very long optimizations through intermediaries. But when I had them both on, I had AWS nodes and Azure nodes, man, the optimizations lit up like a Christmas tree. So the observation here is that the more heterogeneous the underlying internet, the more optimization opportunities we find. And as I said in the beginning, we know that Asia has a very diverse internet underlayment. And that's what the data, in fact, shows. If you look here, this is the better paths table from one of the measurements. You see along the left-hand side, the duration, 15,000 seconds. These are long-term sustained better paths through intermediaries. So you see from Azure in Japan going to Sweden or Ireland, the direct relative latency is 150 or 140 milliseconds. But if you relay through an intermediary, in this case, it looks like oh, geez, what is EU South? Is that Milan and AP Northeast? I think that might be like Tokyo or something like that. If you relay through those paths, you can trim off 22 milliseconds, 17 milliseconds. Now, these aren't the boomerangs. The boomerangs you'll see will be hundreds of milliseconds or 100 milliseconds or so. The other thing that's interesting is if you look at the matrix that has all the green color and so forth, this is a live display of the one-way latency measurements. And when things are different, when there's a shift in routing for some reason, you see these columns and these rows kind of get highlighted. The yellow means that there's a better path to this destination than going direct. And the green that you see there, those are the better paths that could be used. And then the thing on the right, too many better paths to list here. That's not even all of the optimizations that are long-lived just between those two networks. So again, the point is, the more heterogeneous the underlying internet, the more optimizations we find by relaying through intermediaries. this is a live example that you could take a look at if you want. If you go to darp.syntropystack.com, you can bring up this. And this is also a live map, left-hand side, doing one-way latency measurements to the folks on the top. The green indicates that there's a better path than going direct. White means don't bother, just go direct. The path is just fine. Now this is just an Asia snapshot for these nodes that we have running. But if we open up the global, and you can do this by clicking on that link, you can see that up to 70% of the matrix shows that there are better paths. Now a lot of this is interesting too, because the more nodes you get, the number of paths that you can explore grows as an exponent. It's an n squared situation. So the bigger the group, you tend to find more optimizations. Still more research to be done as to where is kind of a sweet spot. Is it 30 nodes? Is it 100 nodes? Where do you find the most bang for the buck compared to the overhead? Again, some interesting studies, and if we were chatting face to face, this would be a great conversation to have. Now I want to share some other anomalies that stumbled upon in this process. This one in the upper left-hand side is showing what I traced down to being MPLS auto optimization. ISPs that turn on their MPLS auto optimization will automatically find their underlying transport circuits rebalanced in order to try and make all the links 50% or less loaded. And as a result, unfortunately for my application, that means for a while it might be 51 milliseconds, and then for 4 hours it might jump up to 61 milliseconds and then drop back down. And it seems kind of bizarre to me, but again, I traced it down and found out that this is actually an understood challenge. Most applications don't seem to care. But you see that happening across. Some other interesting ones that came out of the study, you see the top one there, that is showing what jitter looks like. Where the average might look like a reasonable number, what you see is a high degree of variance in latency, and this really destroys a lot of gaming applications, a lot of latency-sensitive, jitter-sensitive applications. Applications have to try and adopt and adjust to this on the fly, which can cause some poor performance. The next one is my laptop here, actually, and what I learned that this is actually what happens when your Wi-Fi signal is constantly checking to find out where the spectrum is best to use. Now, all of these are up in the 900 milliseconds, almost towards 1,000 milliseconds, almost towards a second. So my laptop is not likely to be a good relay path for anybody, so will not automatically be selected. The other things I've seen are there's one inclining, I've also seen declining measurements. Now this is actually a clock that's slipping. So as a result, you see all the measurements seem to go a little bit slower and slower and slower. When it's not actually going slower, what's happening is the clocks are skewing. It doesn't impact our algorithm though, except to the degree that it goes up just a little bit. And it doesn't seem to have a material impact, thankfully. But it is something that the code looks for now. Then this last thing I mentioned, this idea of better path seconds. So here we have a configuration of a bunch of nodes that I spun up. Again, green is showing that this is a good path. Red is showing that this is a path that someone's going to pay to relay through. And what you have in the very bottom are the relay counts. These are the number of seconds where this particular node provided a better path as an intermediary. So it's interesting because then you can apply, well, what if it's always being used? And what if the compensation that automatically gets transferred on the blockchain is a penny per gigabyte? How many gigabytes can be switched on these steady state better paths? It's kind of an interesting and important question. This is the kind of stuff that I've been working on. Right now, the big questions that come up are, well, what is the source of all these better paths? The number one answer really is that BGP, there's 13, I think, selection criteria that's used by BGP. The number of AS hops is way up there, and that might determine that there's a path that has a few number of ISPs in between, but ISPs are not all invented equally, and it doesn't take into account, BGP does not take into account how the network is performing, whether there's packet loss, whether there's jitter. It's only, you can get there connectivity wise, or you can't. So that's one reason that we can find all these better paths. Another one, as I mentioned, with the boomeranging, policy-based routing is often set for competitiveness reasons, to try and keep a competitor out of your local market, or to maintain peering ratios. That's another one that popped up. I found a number of times when there was misconfigured routing, when a particular route wasn't announced in a location, and as a result, my traffic was going around the world the wrong way. Anyway, these are the sorts of things that are popping up from the measurements. And one of the reasons I wanted to give this talk here is because I'm looking for folks who are interested in this stuff from a networking perspective. I'm looking for another couple of partners that could maybe deploy some of these one-way latency measurement nodes. We could do some analysis, we could do some studies. And the beautiful thing is, the networks that work the best, that provide the lowest latency, the best performance paths, they automatically get selected. It's not something that's configured by this thing. So my theory is that those who have good, solid, well-peered networks and our software running on some bare metal machines connected should be good relay candidates. And I'd love to do some analysis and some work with some of you folks out there. Some folks have called these natural field experiments that I'm doing. I don't care what they call it. It's just it's interesting and kind of fun. I keep on stumbling upon unusual things. The whole point of this is not just to measure the performance, but to be able to mitigate congestion issues, to mitigate partial network segmentations by being able to relay traffic through an intermediary. As far as the blockchain stuff goes, we Syntropy have a blockchain that is behind the scenes, that sole purpose is to ensure fairness between the users of these relays and the people who operate those relays to share their traffic. Right now we have about 10,000 crypto wallets. So we have an active community that's probably watching this video right now. And what we're using for this blockchain is not the proof of work that Bitcoin uses. It uses a lot of fossil fuels to do calculations of mathematical riddles. We're using a nominated proof of stake approach, in which money and sort of the wisdom of crowds comes in, where you have nominators backing validators, and both of them earn tokens as rewards for their participation in the system. Right now we have a full slot of 200 validators currently securing the blockchain. So what I'm looking for here are ISPs and hosting providers with good peering to help me continue this study. And hopefully the next time I come to an apricot, I'll have more data, some more interesting anomalies to share. So in summary, DARP is the Distributed Autonomous Routing Protocol that provides a way to do measured better paths to allow us to provide a thin veneer over the public internet that both has encryption as well as optimized better path calculations. Some of the early data shows that the more heterogeneous the underlying internet is, the more likely we are to find better paths by relaying traffic through intermediaries. And I need to continue this study because I think it's fascinating. Do well-peered ISPs bring more optimization opportunities because they're learning more specific routes, because they have that lower latency path to that destination? And we need more participants and some further study. All of this, as I usually do, is getting factored into a white paper that can be sent around eventually. But right now, I'm looking again for similar interested parties to let me talk you through what we've done so far, talk through the white paper, and see if you have any insights. And let's see if we can grow this thing together. It'll be kind of fun. Here's some references if you guys are interested. And I don't think we have any Q&A time here. So with that, I'll say goodbye and send me an email. I look forward to talking to you.